Welcome to the Deep Dives, where we take your complex research and turn it into the most potent knowledge available. Our focus today is on accelerated language acquisition.
Right.
And if you've ever tried to learn a new language, you know it's one of the most transformative things you can do. But it is also, it is a serious workout for your brain.
That's really the starting point, isn't it? We're not just interested in, how to accumulate more vocabulary. We're focused on the neuroscience of efficiency.
Efficiency, yeah.
Yeah. We've pulled together sources that lay out precisely how the brain processes a new language, what strategies actually work based on, hard cognitive science, and this is crucial, how deeply your socio-emotional state dictates whether you'll ever get to real fluency.
Okay.
So our mission here is to give you a durable and actionable blueprint to make your learning, well, less frustrating and a lot more effective.
I like that, a blueprint. So let's start there.
Yeah.
We hear all the time about the brain's ability to learn, this idea of plasticity. But when we're tackling something as huge as a language, what's the actual biological machinery at work?
The foundation is cerebral plasticity. It's this incredible capacity the brain has to literally reorganize itself. We're not just talking about tweaking a few connections. No, it's creating entirely new neural highways to handle these new demands. So when you decide, I'm going to learn a new language, you are intensely activating that process.
You're basically asking your brain to build a new road system.
Exactly, to absorb information, categorize it, store it, and then eventually produce it almost automatically.
So it's not just one little corner of the brain lighting up. It sounds more like a complete multi-departmental renovation project.
That is the perfect analogy. Language learning is a quintessential multifunctional activity. It engages the parts of your brain for hearing, for vision when you read, for memory, comprehension, speech, all at once.
All at the same time.
And here's a critical insight from the sources. Neuroscience is really clear on this. The more varied and emotionally relevant the input is, the greater the retention.
Emotionally relevant. So context.
Context, feeling, isolated data points, like a random word list that get lost almost immediately. An emotionally charged story that sticks.
Right. We remember stories, not spreadsheets. So if this whole engine is revving, which specific parts of the brain are doing the heaviest lifting?
We can point to 4 major centers working in concert. Think of them as a well-coordinated construction crew.
Okay.
So first, up front, in your frontal lobe, you have Broca's area. This is the production factory.
The factory. This is where you actually make the words.
Precisely. It handles speech formulation, grammar, fluency. Is how you take a thought and assemble it into articulate words.
Okay, so if Broca's is producing the output, what's handling the input? The quality control.
That would be Wernicke's area, which is nestled in the temporal lobe. When you listen to someone or read a sentence, Wernicke's is what fires up so you can actually understand the meaning.
And you can't be fluent without both of those working together.
Not at all.
Okay, but then there's memory. Short-term memory is, the first thing that fails us with new vocabulary. Where does that fit in?
That is the hippocampus. It's absolutely central to all learning. It acts as the transfer station.
The transfer station.
It helps consolidate all that stuff you learn in the short term, like a new verb or 50 new nouns, and it actively works to move that data into long-term storage.
And what keeps the whole operation from, going off the rails?
That's the prefrontal cortex. It's the executive control center. It manages your attention, your decision-making, and maybe most importantly for language learners, it controlled interference. It's what helps you pick the right language when you know more than one.
It takes so much horsepower just to get from hearing a new sound to being able to use it without thinking. What are the, say, 3 big stages that system has to go through?
Okay, so stage 1 is initial processing and working memory. When language comes in, audio or visual, your brain has to hold it in real time to decode it.
Like a mental whiteboard.
Exactly. That's why active listening requires so much focus. You're using that whiteboard for instant analysis.
But how do you stop the information from just being wiped off that whiteboard a minute later?
And that is stage 2, consolidation. This is the vital transfer from that fragile short-term memory to durable long-term storage.
Okay.
And the research shows this happens most efficiently during quality sleep.
During sleep.
Particularly REM cycles. If you don't sleep, you are essentially erasing the work you just did.
So all that cramming late at night or trying to power through an 8-hour session, it's totally counterproductive.
Absolutely. You're robbing the hippocampus of the window it needs to file everything away.
And the final stage?
Automatic activation and fluency. With enough quality exposure and consolidation, the brain just automates the
That's
patterns.
the dream.
That's the stage where you start responding faster. You're not translating in your head anymore.
Yeah.
You're just using the language.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's get practical. If we know the brain needs all this varied input and context and rest, what specific strategies should we be using every day to respect that design?
We can break it down into 5 key strategies. The first is using multimodal stimuli,
Meaning,
meaning engage multiple senses, don't just read, watch videos so you get visual and auditory input at the same time. Write phrases by hand, that's motor and visual. Speak and listen. Every sense you engage adds another hook for that memory to grab onto.
so get off the flashcards and into the messy real world.
Which leads directly to the second strategy, contextual and emotional learning. Isolated vocabulary lists are so hard to remember.
They're the worst.
But words you learn in the context of a story, a dialogue, a simulation, like ordering food, they have a dramatically higher chance of sticking. And if you can connect it to a positive or intense emotional experience, even better.
Now back to recovery. If sleep is so important, how should we manage our study time to optimize that?
Rest and quality sleep are completely non-negotiable. Studying for hours and hours without a break actually hurts your retention.
It overloads you.
It overloads your working memory. A really practical technique here is the Pomodoro technique.
25 minutes on, 5 minutes off.
Exactly. Those short, scheduled breaks let the brain reset and kind of pre-consolidate, preparing it for the next block. You get a much higher yield than from a 2-hour slog.
Okay, and even with all that, we still forget things. The forgetting curve is real. How do we fight it?
With the superpower of spaced repetition, it is the most effective, science-backed method for durable recall. It's literally engineered to fight forgetting.
So you review things just as you're about to forget them.
Right. At increasing intervals,
Yeah.
after a few minutes, then a day, then a week. Digital flashcard systems are amazing for this because they automate that whole process for you.
And finally, how do we stay motivated? I mean, learning a language can take years.
By using gamification and immediate feedback. The brain's reward system loves light challenges, little rewards, quizzes, and it really loves personalized real-time correction.
So you know you're making progress.
Exactly. Quick, clear feedback transforms this abstract struggle into something measurable and even pleasurable. And when you enjoy the process, you do more of it.
That emotional framework seems to be the real differentiator. And it's a great bridge to the specific cognitive hurdles we face. Let's talk about working memory. How critical is that for a new language?
Oh, it's profoundly critical. Working memory is your active mental bandwidth. And the research looking at second language, or L2, performance, it confirms a very tight correlation between your capacity and your success.
So they can actually measure this capacity. I see these acronyms in the sources, OSPAN and SSPAN. What are they?
Right, they were trying to quantify that mental bandwidth, so the Operation Word Span Test, or OSPAN, it measures your ability to process and store verbal info at the same time.
How does that work?
You might have to solve a simple math problem and then immediately remember a word that follows it. And the research showed OSPAN correlated really significantly with reading, syntax, and complex speaking tasks.
So it's a measure of your general ability to juggle complexity.
You could say that. And then there's the Speaking Span Test, or SSPAN.
And that's more specific.
Much more specific. It measures your capacity while you're actively producing language. And it correlated very strongly with speech production and syntax. This tells us it's not about one single measure of intelligence. It's a hybrid. It's a blend of general cognitive capacity and very specific linguistic processing skills.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's switch gears to the nuts and bolts of sound phonology. We look at this fascinating study on Brazilian Portuguese speakers learning Spanish. They're closely related languages, so you'd think it'd be easy. What challenges did they find?
Even with linguistic cousins, the subtle differences in their sound systems, their phonology, can cause huge interference. The study focused on how learners struggle to tell apart certain sounds that exist in both languages, but maybe have a slightly different function.
And they tested a few specific sound pairs, right?
They did. They tested the perception of S versus Z, L versus W, and the really complex rhotic pairs R versus R.
The R sounds. And the guess going in was that the R sounds, the R and R, would be the absolute hardest to tell apart, right?
That was the logical expectation, yeah. Because they're abstract, they're physically hard to produce, and they function differently in the two languages. They're just minor variations in Portuguese, but can change the whole meaning of a word in Spanish.
But that's not what happened.
Not at all. And this is where it gets so counterintuitive. The results showed that participants generally perceive the difference in that complex rhotic pair, the R versus R, the most easily.
Wait, what? The one they thought would be the hardest was the simplest? So what was the biggest problem?
Right. They struggled most with the really subtle difference between us and Z.
Wow.
And performance was at its absolute worst in what they called mixed sentences, where a word from one language was stuck into a sentence of the other. That's when the native phonological system just kicks in automatically and causes the most interference.
That is amazing. It totally flips the script. It suggests that training our brains on the big, abstract, obvious differences is easier than consciously unlearning two sounds we thought we already knew.
Precisely. We need to focus on those subtle shifts in common sounds, not just the brand new ones.
And this connects to being conscious of your learning, right? Metacognition.
It does, directly. The study used the representational redescription model, which is a framework for assessing your levels of consciousness about what you know. They didn't just test perception, they interviewed the learners.
It made them explain their answers.
Exactly. They had to verbally justify why they made a certain choice, aiming for that highest level where you can articulate the rule.
Not just guessing, but knowing why you're right.
And they found that performance really depended on the task. Some people were actually better at explaining the rule in the interview than they were at hearing the difference in the audio test.
So thinking about the rule is a totally separate skill from just hearing it.
It's a distinct skill. And to truly master the language, you absolutely need both.
That moves us perfectly into our last section, the human element. Because all the cognitive tricks in the world won't work if the learner isn't in the right mindset or social context.
Absolutely. The whole field is shifting. Success in language learning, especially for adults, is so much more than memorization. There's a big push for what's called integral education.
Which is what exactly?
It's an approach that intentionally integrates your cognitive, your emotional, and your social needs. It recognizes that you have to develop the whole person to achieve your goals. It's even backed by groups like UNESCO.
So what are the specific socio-emotional skills that learners need?
They map pretty closely to the big 5 personality factors. First, you need openness to experiences, just being curious, creative, enjoying the process. Then, conscientiousness.
The discipline to stick with it.
Right. Organization, perseverance, focus. Then there's extroversion, which is the sociability and enthusiasm that pushes you to actually use the language.
Okay.
And cooperativeness, being tolerant and able to work with others. And finally, emotional stability. You need calmness and self-control when you inevitably make mistakes.
These soft skills are the foundation for all the hard cognitive work we talked about earlier.
They are, and this is reflected in the dominant academic theories. We looked at a survey of language professors, and the results were overwhelming.
What did they say?
A huge majority, 83.3%, said Vygotsky's sociocultural theory is foundational.
The idea that we learn through social interaction.
Exactly. That language is fundamentally built through social interaction and cultural context. It's all about that peer or teacher offering support or scaffolding to guide you into what Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development.
The ZPD.
The learning happens in that social space. And on top of that, more than half of the professors rely on the interaction hypothesis. This theory says that meaningful interaction requires you to actively negotiate meaning.
So asking questions, clarifying, rephrasing things.
Yes. That negotiation is what makes abstract language input truly comprehensible.
So if this social context is so vital, what's the real-world proof? How does it actually make you better at the language?
The research had a great anecdote about this. It involved high school students who were not very engaged and had poor focus.
Okay.
The intervention was a practical task, a job interview role play, all in English.
Oh, that's high stakes. That forces engagement, and you have to cooperate, be curious.
Precisely. It forced them to use those socio-emotional skills. And the feedback afterwards was just remarkable. Students reported not only being more confident, but they were significantly more curious about the language.
So the task itself changed their whole attitude.
That socio-emotional work overcoming shyness, helping each other, it acted as a transformative object. It totally boosted their motivation and their performance.
Which brings us all full circle, back to any high-stakes learning, like in the corporate world. For training to actually work, it has to focus on real context, it has to respect our cognitive load, with short sessions.
And above all, it has to be built around emotional safety,
Emotional safety.
creating a non-judgmental environment, valuing small progress over impossible perfection. That's the cornerstone. You can't just throw data at the brain. You have to create a supportive environment where the whole person feels safe enough to take risks.
That is a perfect summary. We've gone all the way from the wiring in Broca's area to the dynamics of social interaction and even strategic napping.
At the end of the day, your blueprint for efficient learning really rests on 3 pillars. First, respecting your brain's need for multimodal input and real recovery. Sleep, breaks.
Pillar 1.
Second, acknowledging your specific cognitive challenges, like how your native language messes with subtle sounds and managing your working memory. And third, prioritizing your socio-emotional skills, curiosity, collaboration, because that's the real engine that unlocks motivation and retention.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over. If an academic study found that highly abstract, difficult to produce sounds, like those R and R pairs, were often easier for learners to consciously identify than the super subtle differences in common sounds like S and Z. What seemingly small, insignificant detail in your current language stack are you ignoring right now? The solution to your next breakthrough might not be in learning 1,000 new words, but in focusing on the least obvious contrast that your native brain is actively fighting against.